opportunity for IT since IT, which I think is a fair sort of summary of what we've discussed today and what the future could look like. So welcome, guys. Thank you for joining us today. It's great to have you with us again.
Hi, David. How are you?
Yeah, very well, very well. I can see you've got your slides ready to rock and roll there, guys. So over to you. Thank you very much.
Okay. Hi, folks. So I'm Patrick Bolger, and I'm Hornbill's Chief Evangelist. And today I want to explain why ESM is the biggest opportunity for IT since IT. I think it's fair to say that we lived through a key moment in history, and the pandemic was a huge catalyst for change, and it will continue to affect our personal and professional lives, but it has undoubtedly already changed the world of work for good. So these stats, if I can get those going, these stats are remote working statistics from finder.com and findstack.com. I'm not going to read them all as they're fairly self-explanatory, but what is clear is that remote and hybrid working are here to stay. A survey by the BBC this year found that almost all of the UK's top 50 employers are not planning to bring staff back to the office full time. Around 96% are going to embrace a mixture of home and office working, with staff encouraged to work from home at least 2 to 3 days a week. And Grant Thornton did some research about office space and found that about 40% of mid-sized UK companies are expecting to reduce their office space. 74% of those are looking to decrease it by about a quarter, and a further 12% are reducing it by about a half. So with such radical transformation underway, we have to ask ourselves whether the old ways are still fit for delivering the solutions and the value that IT needs to provide going forward. So digital transformation, that's leapt forward a decade in the last year, and it's reshaping entire markets. And with everything possible moving to the cloud, things like desktop, device as a service, they're now legitimate competition. Outsourcing is also on the rise. So in Q3 and Q4 last year, the value of UK IT outsourcing contracts increased by 60% compared with the same period in the previous year. So if we apply old practices and focus on watering our own IT gardens rather than improving business outcomes, we will fail to show value. And what we do need to do is to think differently. And what is abundantly clear over the last year is that doing nothing now is a really bad idea. So now, as the economies are opening up and businesses are preparing for the new normal, IT's transformation has definitely begun. So the good news for our industry is that IT is now more critically important to our organization's success than it has ever been. So this year, Gartner said that global IT spending will rise to almost $4 trillion. It's a rise of 6.2% over last year. So many of the initiatives that you had to put on hold last year, such as hiring staff or updating infrastructure and rolling out new products, so they can be kickstarted again, but there will be significant changes. There's going to be a radical shift in the distribution of IT spending, with greater investment in security, supporting employees working from home, cloud-based infrastructure, and low-code platforms that make it easier to automate and integrate your processes. However, for many IT groups, that is going to come at the cost of data centers, local IT infrastructure, and even staffing levels. So make no mistake, we are entering a period of hyper-transformation. And if we can't move fast enough, we risk becoming the limiting factor of the very change that IT is not only meant to facilitate, but lead. So you might be doing a fantastic job of making improvements within IT, but are you really adding value that gets you noticed? If your colleagues are still struggling with things that you have long since resolved, there's your immediate opportunity to add highly visible business value. Because every day our employees are struggling with accessing services from different business units. So whether it's IT, HR, facilities, legal, they're forced through different channels and inefficient siloed working practices. So what you'll find is this: disparate systems, disjointed processes, reliance on email and spreadsheets, or homegrown applications. What that means is employees have no visibility of the progress of their requests, so they get lost productivity and the poor service experience. And as a result, your service delivery teams are swamped with interactions, low value stuff. They're calls that your customers don't want to make and that your service doesn't want to take. So if you're going to show value, ESM is the biggest opportunity for IT since IT. Now, ESM isn't new. We first coined the term, I should say, enterprise support platform back in 2005. But at that time, the technology was a lot older, and configuring solutions, that wasn't easy, and upgrading it was a mission. But today, things are very different. So our no-code platform allows non-technical people to configure and automate anything within a few clicks. It's so simple The process typically starts off at IT helping another department, not by implementing a solution, but to solve one simple problem, or one challenge that's really been bugging them. But once those teams see how easy it is to deliver a hugely improved digital experience, they get hungry for more. So typically these teams then take ownership of their own solutions, so they execute their own ideas and take charge of their own destiny. And because it's a second generation SaaS tool, there's no upgrade pains. So we push out updates all the time. So it's just like updating Facebook on your phone. Customizations keep working. You don't have to reapply or rework them. So in this new remote world, the ability for our employees to access their services and for service delivery teams to automate the delivery process, that's paramount. So I'd say today about 75% of all new inquiries we receive have got ESM requirements, and most of our existing customers are already using Hornbill in multiple areas outside of IT. And the thing is, it's not that hard. Here's just a few examples. So University of Portsmouth here saying that their enterprise strategy has come on in leaps and bounds since deploying Hornbill. They're replacing older systems right across their estate, removing shared mailboxes across multiple teams, and improving efficiency. But more importantly, they're adding that highly visible business value across the entire business. And it's not just for large organizations. So one of our customers here, Secure Trust Bank, they only have 2,500 employees, but Hornbill is now being deployed to 17 different teams across the entire organization. And as they're saying here, it's managed to streamline and improve their employee experience. Here's another great example, Waltham Forest Council. This deployment started with IT, and their head of IT, Simon Copsey, described it as one of the most straightforward implementations of a service management and business process platform that he's ever involved with. But once that self-service portal was rolled out to employees, HR came knocking and said, look, could you solve some of our challenges? So IT just helped them to get a couple of HR processes stood up. Then the HR team themselves took over and configured the tool. And within just 6 months, the results they got were incredibly impressive. So here's an example of that. So employee satisfaction increased by 22%, dissatisfaction decreased by 29%. The number of forms for recruitment reduced by 72%, and they almost halved their information duplication. But more importantly, the time they took to recruit new staff was reduced by over a third. So this is not only good for our customers, it's also good for us. So on the G2 review platform, Hornbill is now positioned by customer advocacy as the #1 enterprise solution across 3 market sectors in Europe. So IT service management, service desk, and customer self-service. We have the highest rate of user adoption, the best relationship with customers, the best support, and the highest net promoter score of any vendor. So what I'd like to do now is to hand you over to my colleague, Steve Boardman, who's our kind of product specialist and head of pre-sales. So I don't know who can do the switch here, but if someone can transfer ownership over to Steve, he can get into the product. I don't know if David's able to do that.
Yeah, you should have a pop-up shortly, hopefully. There we go. There we go.
Thank you very much, David.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Pat. So for this section of the presentation, I just want to sort of evidence some of the concepts that Pat was mentioning and sort of show you how we do that on Hornbill. So first and foremost, just want to sort of cover off, there's really sort of 2 main parties in this. You've obviously got the internal support providers, so that's, as Pat said, IT, HR, finance, marketing, or any other business function. And then secondly, there's the concept of that common customer, whether that's internal or external. And with Hornbill, what we do is we allow those internal support providers to coexist on that single instance, both with isolation and autonomy where needed, but also working collaboratively to support requests from that common customer where it's applicable. And we do that on Hornbill by providing the ability for our customers to define as many service domains as they need and allow those internal service providers to define, configure, and publish those services that they offer to those common customers through a common channel. They do that with the ability then to underpin the processes that support those services using process orchestration. So that's the routing, the timers, the tasks, the approvals, the notifications, and of course, automations. So Hornbill's IT operations management capability allow you to automate those low value manual sort of interactions that you might need to perform. And whether that's With your cloud services or your behind the firewall systems, this is really just about automating in those processes, things like user creation and disablement and moving people in and out of their AD groups for access requests, or as part of your joiners, movers, leavers processes that spans all those different internal service providers. And there's many, many examples that we could go into at another time. And we do that through delivering a number of different line of business applications. But for the time that we've got today, I'm just really going to focus on our Service Manager app, and specifically request fulfillment, which is fairly common across multiple different service providers. So with that in mind, I'm just going to come into the front end here and introduce you to a couple of personas. Firstly, we've got Graham, who works in an IT context. And in Graham's world, he's of course interested in things like change, configuration management, asset management, and of course the delivery of IT services. So in that context, he's responsible for things like the desktop support service, for mobiles, for printers, for VPN access, that type of thing. And if we just drill down into one of those services, we can have a look at a couple of key components that allows us to provide this model. The first of which is our security model around supporting teams. What this allows you to do is restrict access to the tickets raised against this service just to the members of, or the agents that are members of these particular teams. And that'll be important when we come on and think about the sensitive nature of data that might be used in HR and finance in a second. The other area I just want to touch on here is subscription. So who's entitled to this service and who's going to have access to not only make requests, but content that's related to it, so it's targeted to the right people. And we're talking about news and information in the format of bulletins. We're talking about sharing the relevant knowledge in the format of FAQs and knowledge documents, but also promoting, in this context for today, the options that are available to the subscribed users of that service in terms of the request catalog. So making requests for equipment or home bundles or access to distribution groups, with a key part being that you can define unique data capture forms and unique business process automation for each and every item that you provide and offer. If we contrast that then with a different user here, Sue's our HR service delivery manager. So when she's looking at the service portfolio, she's only seeing the services that are relevant to her, none of the IT specific ones, and vice versa. And when she looks at some of the services she offers in terms of My Benefits, it's just the HR benefits team that will have access to view, have tickets assigned to them, to search and report on any data that's logged against those services. But of course, there are examples where we need our teams to collaborate. And that might be your joiners, movers, leavers process, where we need to have our first line, our device team, our facilities, our HR teams, all working collaboratively on the fulfillment of tickets that are raised against it. Now, again, from HR's perspective, Sue's not interested in change and asset management as such. She's perhaps more focused on ensuring that they've got a solid and reliable grievance process, or that her recruitment process is streamlined and we remove the need for forms, and that we can reduce the time between interactions with the people that are being involved. So these types of views are really critical for how our teams work. With all that in mind, we obviously want to have a single destination where we can surface that content up. So I'm just going to come over to self-service as Tom, who's just an employee within the business. I'll just sort of tag on to one of the questions raised earlier. Yep, we support single sign-on against any of your identity providers, and again we use SAML as the protocol for that, so fairly common I'm sure across most vendors. But the key thing here is that Tom in this case is going to get a personalized experience based on the services he's subscribed to and the content that's linked to those services. You're also able to customize it in terms of branding, logos, and in fact anything that we see on these pages, because each element, the search bar, these navigation options, the news and event, they're just widgets you can construct with a drag and drop canvas designer. What this approach does afford to you is allowing each of those internal service providers to construct pages with the data as they want to present. So from an IT point of view, it might be quick actions and impacted services and visibility of service availability. From a HR point of view, it might be more of a focus to share feedback information, useful links, policies and procedures that are relevant to the users of HR on here, or where I might go to initiate an enrolment into a benefit that I'm entitled to. So again, it allows your teams to construct this as it suits them. And with that in mind, I just want to work through 3 very quick examples of how you might then use that from a request fulfillment perspective. Pat mentioned about, you know, replacing emails and phone calls in terms of people sort of submitting queries, but we can still provide the ability for users to be able to ask those types of questions. So, you know, when can I retire? That's always a good one. Now, of course, with that could be routed to the correct team and they can respond with a one action and it can close it down. Or we can automate the response if we've got those scripts in place, or maybe preferably we define that as a FAQ and they never have to ask the question in the first place. But those options are available. The second option, and it comes back to that concept of reducing forms and reducing the time to actually deliver on here. A good example of that might be either your recruitment or your enrolment process for some of the benefits you offer. So in this example here, if I wanted to enroll in the Cycle to Work scheme and it was provided by an external organisation, we can perhaps provide all the context, the links to the website, the links to their videos, so our employees can get the context and understand what's actually being offered. If it makes sense to them and they're happy, great, we can go ahead and get their acceptance to terms and conditions. But if they want to speak to us, no problem. We'll actually get there a time that's convenient with them and we'll engage with them. But by doing this approach here and seeking their acceptance on the implications of a salary sacrifice benefit in terms of, you know, mortgage applications and a reduction in your overall salary, we can take care and reduce that process. Once they're ready, fantastic, we'll click on finish and we can start to initiate that process. In this particular example, it might be as simple as going, we've initiated it, you've accepted the terms and conditions, and in the background we've sent you an email, and in that email we're going to have contained all the information you need to go to that external party with the relevant employer code and what's going to happen next. And as Pat said, those examples really do streamline the time from request through to fulfillment, and we'll only really be involved once you've returned those forms and we need to action it. The third and final example I just want to touch on here is where these teams can work collaboratively, and onboarding is a classic example of where we might do that. So I'm just going to put some details in that someone that's joining us. Let's have Sean that's joining us in a particular role, on a particular day, in a particular department, working out of one of our offices, and we'll choose London, and we'll go ahead and give them some equipment and access to apps and services and such like. Now, in doing that, we know that we're going to have to involve multiple different teams, and obviously this heads-up display is going to give the requester visibility of what facilities might need to do and what our IT colleagues might need to do. But as well as doing those sort of manual tasks, what we can also automate is the creation of user accounts in AD, whether that be on-prem or in the cloud. We can add them to the relevant groups. We can spin them up on Hornbill, give them role access. All of that can be done in real time without the teams needs to engage on that. And if we just switch over here to our AD environment, we can see that Sean's not on there. Let's just switch out. That's locked up. That's AD for me. And so we can see here that that user's account details have been created. I'd never suggest you do this in a live environment, but for demo purposes, I'll just publish those back to this particular ticket. And if we come in as a support provider where this ticket has been routed, and we'll have here Graham from an IT perspective. Let's just get rid of that VPN access. There we go. That ticket's come in. We'll just open it up. On here we can see obviously all the automated stuff that's been completed, but there are a couple of manual tasks here for me to do things like configuring the equipment or issuing a mobile device. Now, I'm not going to allocate a mobile on this occasion because I just wanted to demonstrate that, of course, we could have continued to allocate tasks sequentially or in parallel to our colleagues in facilities. However, in this example here, I've actually automated the creation of a linked ticket, and I've assigned that over to my colleague in facilities, who happens to be John on this occasion. He comes in, picks up his ticket. He can be given a subset of the data that's needed, so he doesn't have to have visibility about the whole ticket, and he can go ahead following the process that he wants to follow in his team, building that himself to complete things like issuing the security pass and finally the parking permit, safe in the knowledge that all the work that his team is doing is automatically updating that parent ticket. So from an audit perspective, all of the actions on the sub-tickets are updating and completing that parent ticket. And the last thing I'm going to do just before we wrap up here is just say, if you're going to the effort of completing and providing these services and processes, you've probably got some key performance indicators with the business in terms of how you're performing. And Hornbill has many reporting and analytic options, and that can, just by example, give you the ability to define what those key performance indicators are as measures, and then to start to analyze the trending of how you're performing against those measures over time. We can start to utilize these visuals. But we can wrap those up into dashboards. And if we have a quick look at one of those, well, we can start to see, well, if we've agreed to keep the backlog below a certain level and get the satisfaction levels up and the response times down and promote a particular channel, we can see how we're performing overall, but also how each of those individual service providers in the organization is contributing and performing. So at that point, I'm just going to stop and I'm going to hand you back to Pat, who's just going to wrap up and see if we've got any time for any questions.
All right, thank you. Thank you on that. So yeah, I mean, that literally, I was just going to wrap up and just see if Dave had any questions. Our contact details are there, so if you need to get in touch with us, you can do quite easily. So David, have we got time for questions?
Yeah, we'll have I think we'll at least squeeze one in, Pat. Thank you for that, guys. Again, another great overview there. And certainly you can see the complexity of trying to, as we knew anyway, but I think the more the people look at this to understand actually, is it a viable thing as a strategy and organization, the complexity. So I think we've got a couple of questions that come through which relate to that to some degree, I think. So out of the box, business process templates, what comes out of the box? How easy it is to set that up as an implementation, and how do you support that?
Sure. So as you expect, we do provide those templated processes out the box for not just IT but all the other areas. In fact, it's common in our customer community that our customer base share those processes, because our processes can be downloaded in one click and uploaded to another instance in another single click, and it's in a full drag and drop Canvas environment, and customers use those either as a starter for 10, or in fact they adopt the good ideas that we've got and we've created, or that our other customers have built. So it's really straightforward, really easy business level process creation.
Great stuff. I think one more then. Again, if you consider the complexity of bringing all this into the rest of the organization and putting some control around measurements and service level agreements and stuff like that, you'd expect to have a multiple layered, nuanced service there with different teams having different SLAs and OLAs and all that wonderful stuff if we bring it all to the organization. So from that, in that respect, how do you approach, or does the tool allow to have multiple teams, service providers, whatever, control their own processes, SLAs, categories, all that stuff? Yeah.
Absolutely, great question. Yeah, and that's exactly what our service-centric model and approach is that against each service you can define, as you say, the relevant service levels, the relevant categories, the relevant process, the relevant data capture forms, the forms themselves and the fields that you want visible. All of that is configurable down at an individual service level, so it does allow IT, facilities, HR all to have complete control and autonomy over their environment, if you like, but again, all surfaced up in a single destination and channel for their common customers to consume.
Yeah, I like that. We might touch on that a little bit later, Pat, when we come into the Q&A. That single destination, the destination application, that mentality, right, and what that means for an organization who may have historic legacy of stuff everywhere, right? So we'll come on to that. Guys, thank you very much indeed. It's great to listen to you again. And Pat, you'll be joining us on the Q&A a little bit later, so we look forward to seeing you then.